Okay, picture this. It is the dead of night, January 26th, 1943. You're David Stirling, a towering British officer, and you suddenly wake up in a pitch-black cave in Tunisia, only to find a German soldier with a gun pointed right at your head. And just like that, in a split second, your 18-month reign of terrorizing enemy airfields across the North African desert is completely over. It's an absolutely incredible scene, and in this explainer today, we are diving deep into the source material to unpack the man behind this crazy moment. To the combined German and Italian forces, the Axis powers, this guy was literally a living nightmare. By late 1942, enemy radio communications across North Africa were buzzing with absolute terror over a figure they called the Phantom Major. Stirling was feared because he would just appear out of this harsh, unforgiving desert, completely wreck an airfield in the dead of night, and vanish without a trace. And while the British press ate up this heroic propaganda, a massive historical question hangs over his towering legend. Which brings us to the core mystery we're unpacking today. For decades, the orthodox historical view was basically that David Stirling single-handedly dreamt up and created the Special Air Service, the legendary SAS. But when you really scrutinize the records, you have to ask, did he actually build this unit alone, or were other key figures way more responsible for its tactical success on the ground?
Section 1. From Rebel to Soldier, the Unlikely Hero.
To really understand the myth of the Phantom Major, we first have to look at his deeply flawed beginnings, because Stirling had a serious rebellious streak. Born in 1915 to Scottish aristocracy, he was actually a descendant of the Royal House of Stuart. But he was definitely not your model citizen. I mean, the guy was expelled from Cambridge University after dozens of incidents involving heavy drinking and gambling. Looking for adventure, he actually went over to the US and was working as a cattle herder in Montana when World War II kicked off. He rushed back to Britain in 1939 to rejoin the Scots Guards. Now, he clearly wasn't one for rules, but that exact disdain for convention, that is exactly what would make him perfect for irregular warfare. The guy had an incredibly commanding physical presence, standing at a towering 6.5 feet tall. But his early days in the war, not exactly heroic. Stationed in Cairo in 1941, he was completely idle. He was moody, depressed, and spent most of his time just drinking heavily at a gentleman's club. Get this, his most notable injury during this time happened on a night out when he tripped, fell, and actually tore his eye on a tent rope. It is a pretty absurd start for a man who'd go on to become a global military icon.
Section 2. Who really built the SAS? The true architects.
So let's fast forward to the summer of 1941. It all comes down to a serendipitous meeting in a Cairo mess hall that changed literally everything. On one side, you have Stirling, the charismatic catalyst, desperately wanting to see action. And on the other, you have Jock Lewis, an Indian-born British officer who a lot of historians now argue is the true architect of the SAS. Lewis was the guy who managed to secure a shipment of parachutes that had been accidentally delivered to Egypt instead of India. And even more impressively, he invented the Lewis bomb. By mixing diesel and thermite, he created this lightweight plastic incendiary device, meaning a single operative could carry dozens of explosives across the desert. This kind of technical brilliance really challenges the whole idea that Stirling was the sole genius here. Naturally, Stirling and Lewis decided to test these misdirected parachutes out in the desert using a Vickers biplane. And, well, it did not go well. Stirling's parachute snagged on the tail of the plane, ripped open, and he plummeted to the ground at a terrifying speed. He was knocked completely unconscious on impact and woke up in an Alexandria hospital with severe spinal injuries. We're talking injuries so bad they left him with debilitating back pain and migraines for the rest of his life. But this is where Stirling's sheer force of will completely changed history. While he was stuck in that hospital bed, paralyzed by pain, he mapped out the blueprint for specialized desert strike force. Using his high society connections and just unbelievable audacity, he managed to bypass all the usual military red tape and get his plan directly in front of the Middle East Commander-in-Chief, Claude Auchinleck. He convinced Auchinleck to authorize the unit, which was originally called L Detachment, and just like that, the SAS, along with its famously enduring motto, "Who dares wins," was officially born. Section 3. The Politician versus the Soldier. Forging a Legend in the Desert. Now, we've got to look at the messy reality of their first operations, because the Phantom Major myth doesn't always match the historical combat record. Their very first mission, in November 1941, Operation Squatter, it was a complete disaster. They attempted a parachute drop during a massive desert gale, and over half of the 55 men who jumped were lost, killed, or stranded. But they learned fast. They completely ditched the parachutes, teamed up with the long-range desert group, and pivoted to devastating hit-and-run attacks using heavily armed jeeps. The turnaround was wild. By July 1942 at City Hanish, 18 jeeps drove in an arrowhead formation under the cover of darkness and destroyed nearly 40 Axis planes without a single SAS casualty. The secret sauce here was an absolute division of labor. On the ground, you had Paddy Mayne, a Northern Irish former boxer and lawyer. Make no mistake, Mayne was undeniably the better field commander. He was ruthless, focused entirely on gun maintenance and day-to-day survival. Then you had Stirling. Stirling was the indispensable political shield. In one famously audacious move, Stirling openly disobeyed direct orders, snuck into a fancy Cairo dinner party he definitely wasn't invited to, and boldly cornered Prime Minister Winston Churchill. I mean, for a junior officer to do that, unheard of. But he pitched Churchill directly and secured the jeeps, guns, and resources the unit desperately needed. Thanks to Stirling's political maneuvering and Mayne's tactical brilliance, by January 1942, the SAS had destroyed over 100 Axis planes on the ground. And the historical records actually show that Paddy Mayne personally destroyed more enemy aircraft in North Africa than anyone else. Pulling off massive raids with 0 casualties and racking up those kinds of numbers is just a testament to how well this partnership worked.
Section 4. Capture and Controversy. The Phantom Fades.
So let's go back to that Tunisian cave in January 1943. That moment marked the abrupt end of Stirling's combat days. Captured by a special German Luftwaffe unit, he spent the rest of the war bouncing between prisons in Italy and eventually landing in the notorious Colditz Castle in Germany. To his credit, he was relentless, making at least half a dozen escape attempts before being liberated just weeks before the war ended. But with him gone for years, it was Paddy Mayne and Stirling's brother Bill Stirling who completely restructured the SAS and took total operational control as the Allies pushed into Europe. After the war, Stirling definitely didn't slow down, but his life became, well, incredibly complex. He moved to Rhodesia and formed the Capricorn Africa Society. This was a political project aimed at creating a unified African nationalism free from racial discrimination, though it remained very tangled up in colonial politics of the era. He later joked that he owned the world's largest collection of bankrupt television stations. Then in the 70s, he basically pioneered modern private military contracting, which included an aborted, highly secretive plot to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. He even formed a clandestine private paramilitary group called GB-75, designed to take over UK infrastructure during nationwide strikes. That plan was super controversial and was swiftly quashed the second it leaked to the press.
Section 5. Evaluating a Complex Legacy. Separating Man from Myth. So, how do we evaluate a man who was knighted in 1990 just before his death, yet who was both a flawed field commander and an utterly brilliant lobbyist? Modern historical consensus tells us the reality lies squarely in the middle. David Stirling was not the solo visionary that early wartime propaganda painted him to be. Jock Lewis was a massive part of the unit's technical framework, and Paddy Mayne was unequivocally the better soldier on the ground. But, and this is a big but, without Stirling's political guile, his undeniable charisma, and his sheer nerve to bypass generals and speak directly to Churchill, the SAS would have absolutely been shut down in its infancy. He was the indispensable political shield. So, taking all of this in, how do you weigh the evidence? Was the legendary Phantom Major a true visionary who single-handedly drove the creation of the Special Air Service? Or was he a brilliant opportunist who just took credit for the grueling work of others? The truth is likely a messy, totally fascinating combination of both. Think about the facts we've unpacked in this explainer today, and always keep questioning the history behind the myth.